So a little bit about myself. I'm actually, as of yesterday, 56 years old,
Hmm.
which is still surprising to me. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but as you all know, it happens. I met
Happy
Steiner when
birthday.
I was about 17. I did the meditative exercises sort of around the clock from 17 till about 21. Had definitive spiritual experiences and got completely ungrounded as a person, almost to the point where it was just nip and tuck whether I was going to end up as homeless or not. So I had to actually back away from the meditative work and become a more substantial person. I may have overshot the mark a little bit in terms of substantiality, but I was able to then pick up the meditations again when I was in my early 40s, and have been meditating fairly regularly and fairly seriously since then. I would say that I'm actually, and this is important to take this seriously, I'm actually not qualified to teach the anthroposophical meditative path. I'm a student of Rudolf Steiner's, and a serious one as I can be, but I'm not a teacher of the anthroposophical path. And I think that's important to understand. Students on their way toward enlightenment are, as Steiner describes, climbing up different sides of the mountain. And as a result, their view of things will be dependent on their perspective. I still think it's very useful for us to share, and so I don't mind sharing my experience and the insights that I've developed, but I think it's very important to understand that I'm a student of the path and not a teacher of the path. And so the perspective that comes from me will be one that is still refracted through my individuality and my peculiarities. It's only when you get to the top of the mountain that you can see all views, and I'm far from that. So just bear that in mind. I think it's important. If I talk about the path in a way that seems very different than your understanding of the meditative path, that doesn't mean I'm right or you're right. It means we're at different stages of the journey up the mountain. So, and we're looking at different views. And so it's good to share these views and help each other out. I work in the government, in the Ministry of Health. I also work as a psychotherapist. I've been practicing psychotherapy after having done quite a rigorous training. And my anthroposophical work does come into both workplaces, but most especially into my psychotherapy practice. I'm married and have a 28-year-old daughter, a wife, Linda, who's not an anthroposophist. And will sometimes ask me to read occult science to her if she's having trouble falling asleep. What I'd like to do for the talk is really look into this. Oh, I should just say I'm involved in a number of anthroposophical organizations, the Toronto branch of the Anthroposophical Society of Canada, the Rudolf Steiner Center, which is going to be called the Rudolf Steiner College of Canada shortly. We've become a private career college and are going to be training people in several vocations, including hopefully biodynamic farming soon. So my life in anthroposophy is fairly rich, and I feel very blessed that I met anthroposophy in a way that came into my life at a time when I could really start to absorb it and work with it. Okay, so I'd like to talk about the fact that we are designed for enlightenment. Every human being is profoundly, profoundly designed to achieve enlightenment. And I'd like to give a bit of a backstory to that, and then talk about how it is that you achieve enlightenment by working to find the hidden thresholds in everyday experience, and how you work at those thresholds to stimulate a certain kind of development that you are, in a sense, designed to achieve. So let's go back. I think probably most of the people in the meeting have some familiarity with anthroposophy and would know that the germ of the physical body was laid down in ancient Saturn through tremendous effort by a whole host of spiritual beings. In the second Earth evolution, ancient Sun, that body was brought into a kind of a living condition. So the physical body has now been developed through two planetary evolutions or planetary incarnations. And in the sun, the living or the etheric is added. And then in the third incarnation of the planet Earth, the moon incarnation, we have the addition of the astral or the foundation of consciousness. But it's only until we get to the fourth planetary incarnation, the Earth evolution that we're in now, that the human ego, the I am, descends down into this vehicle. You can think of the physical, the etheric, and astral as the vehicle of gift. This was given to us by the spiritual world. And our ego, our I am, is descended down into it. This descent process took a long time, obviously, through many cycles of time in Earth evolution. And we end up where we are now as a result of, first of all, separating out of the divine. And you can think of us, if it helps, it's a bit of an analogy, but you could think of us as a drop of water from the ocean. And that gets separated out from the spiritual ocean and descends down into the vehicle that we're in now. So it's a process of separating off from the rest of the spirit. And that process didn't happen quickly. It happened very gradually and very slowly, according to Dr. Steiner. And the passage out of the spiritual unity to the individual I am, where we can each say that for ourselves and no one can say it for us, goes first through a series of states of consciousness that are dependent on what are, you could say, are the atavistic chakras, or sense organs of an astral etheric nature. So these astral etheric sense organs, which we find in the crown, between the eyes, in the throat, in the heart, the pit of the stomach, the abdomen, and at the base of the spine, these were the basis of awareness for us as we descended out of the divine and gradually into the physical body. And we made a very long and gradual transition from the astral etheric organs in their atavistic state, and I'll come back to what that means in a second, to the physical etheric organs that we're all using now. So there was a transition from one set of conscious states that depend on the atavistic astral etheric organs to the state of consciousness that we're in now that depends heavily on the physical etheric, that is the living body, the living physical body, eyes, ears, taste, touch, etc. Now, when we were descending from the spirit world into the physical body, the higher astral etheric organs were not completely developed. They were only half developed. The other half was in a seed-like form. So the form that the half that was developed was also part of this vehicle of gift, as I sometimes think of it, in that it was not something we had to create for ourselves. As the human ego was descending down from the higher states of consciousness into the consciousness that we're in now, the atavistic consciousness was supplied. And it was supplied through these astral etheric organs. So just to pause for a second on astral etheric organs. You know, each of the physical organs has quite a different quality to it. You know, sound is quite different than vision, and vision is quite different than taste. The creation of an organ system that informs you of the world that you live in is a highly developed process. So in ancient Saturn, when the first germ of the physical body was being laid down, these organs were these physical organs, the living body organs that we have, were part of that design. But so were these higher organs, the astral etheric organs. And they too all bring different elements to consciousness. So because they're higher organs, we can't talk about them in terms of sensation. We have to talk about them in terms of inner states. So you can think about soul warmth or soul light. I won't get into too much description of what that means right now. It is a challenge to try and understand before you have developed it again, what these organs provided. But the states of atavistic consciousness that existed through Lemuria and Atlantis put the human being in touch with the world around them in the sense of the astral and the spiritual. And only gradually did the physical world around them become clear. In fact, there's quite a grand transition. We were more awake at night, in a sense, where we were aware of the spiritual world, than we were during the day. Now we're profoundly asleep at night and very wide awake during the day. And that's because these higher astral etheric organs have gradually dimmed and become kind of inert as we've moved deeper into physical incarnation, and the corresponding physical living organs, the physical etheric organs, have awoken. So we now see and hear very clearly, but we don't have such a good awareness of what we would be able to be aware of through the astral etheric organs. And of course, the kind of awareness you have through astral etheric organs is quite different. People often think that if they will develop their astral etheric organs, they'll just have another kind of sensation. In other words, in addition to vision and sound and touch, they'll have something new. But in fact, they'll have something completely different. And that the organ systems are designed as the basis of cognition. For those of you who have studied the philosophy of freedom, you'll know that in this state of cognition, we have to take what comes through the organ systems as percept and marry it with the meaning that comes through thinking, which is concept. And that's how we know things in this world. We're actually immersed in a world that is saturated by concepts. We're so saturated in it that we don't realize that we've suffused things together in order to walk around in this state of consciousness. You can get a sense of that, though, if you look, for example, if you don't know anything about auto mechanics and you open the hood of a truck and look at it, you'll be able to say things like, well, that's a pipe and that's something made of metal and that's probably rubber, but you won't have many concepts. Whereas if you're an auto mechanic and you open the hood of a truck, you'll say, oh no, that's the housing for the cylinders and so and so and so on. And the whole visual impression of it will be quite different because you'll be able to saturate it with concepts. When we get to the etheric astral organs, the process is not quite the same. There is still a two-sidedness with the astral etheric organs, but it's not as passive. In this state of consciousness, you open your eyes and you see, and then you conceptualize what you're seeing. Maybe you're in a dark room and you can't make it out at first, and then you realize, oh, that's my cat walking across the bed. That's what I'm seeing. In the astral etheric organs, you actually have to pour yourself out into the sensation and work with it in a much more real way, a way in which you're much more deeply engaged. So we should understand that the creation of the astral etheric organs leads to experiences that are quite different. It's not just more sensation, it's quite different. So this is all part of the way we are designed. These astral etheric organs, which developed in a atavistic way and have now gone dim, are part of a larger organ that has never yet been developed. It's a seed that was put in us from primeval times, and that seed has never been developed. The thing about that seed is it can't get developed without our participation. So you are designed for enlightenment, but at some point you have to underdo the work to set these seeds in motion. They are there in your being, and at some point you can make the choice to develop them. Now, there are really, in a sense, two dimensions to this development process. Anybody who's trying to be a good human being is already on the path of the anthroposophical, or the path of knowledge, you could say. And the first segment or dimension of this really you could describe as the path of karma. As we go from earth life to earth life, we're developing soul strengths and skills that lead to the stimulation of the growth of the chakras. So the growth of the chakras is happening for all of us, but at a certain point, it will become clear to each human being who's trying to be a good human being that they have to add something to that in order for them to really develop. This can actually happen quite naturally through somebody who's had many incarnations. It is possible for the chakras to come into being simply on the path of karma. And that would be for someone who's had many lives and had very rich experiences during those lives. But for most people who start to have some kind of threshold experiences, it becomes clear that they have to undertake the development of their chakras in a more organized way, and that takes consistent and significant effort. Now, the interesting thing about this way in which we're designed is the starting point for all of the chakra development is to be found in what you might call occult thresholds in everyday experience. It's not something bizarre or strange that you have to do in order to develop these chakras. The seeds or the pathways of setting the seeds into growth are in everyday experience. They're literally all around us. But until you have the guidance of a teacher, you're not likely to find them. There are many everyday experiences which do not have this generative capacity. Some do, some don't. To understand which ones do, and to understand how to work with these aspects of everyday experience, you need the guidance of a spiritual teacher. We couldn't ask for a better spiritual teacher than Dr. Rudolf Steiner. He lays this out in incredible clarity. So what are these everyday experiences? Those of you who have read Knowledge of the Higher Worlds will be quite familiar with what I'm about to say. But one of the everyday experiences that has this kind of developmental potential to set a chakra in motion is the everyday experience of really how you feel when you see something growing and blooming, and how you feel when you see something dying and decaying. We see these things all the time. They're all around us all the time, but we don't really pay much attention to them. And this is the difference. It's a kind of attention that is required to aspects of these everyday experiences. And you would be mistaken to think, provided I have tremendous detailed attention to anything, anything can be a spiritual door. It's not the case. There are certain experiences that have this developmental potential, and that's why a spiritual teacher is required to guide you to them. So in growth and decay, there is a tremendous occult threshold available to us. I think most of you on the line would have read about this exercise. You look at something growing and blooming, and then after you've really absorbed it as objectively as you can, you've looked at the shape of the leaf and the shape of the flower and the shape of the stem and the quality of the color, then you put away, in a sense, that visual impression and really listen to how you feel. What comes up in your life of feeling? And then you find a leaf, or that's all sort of, losing its shape and losing its color, starting to have holes in its body and all that kind of thing, or another kind of dying plant. And you look at the quality of that. And then again, after you've really studied the decomposition process visually, you might smell it too, then, put it away and see how it feels. Now, the first time I did this meditation, I would say I had to do it 100 times at least. I'm not a fast learner. I had to do it maybe 100 times before I got any clue of the soul warmth and soul coldness that starts to emerge. but it starts to emerge, and then it becomes very potent to the point that soul warmth and soul coldness become a new experience that you can have. Just as I can, in the morning open my eyes and see and listen, I now can turn through a kind of inner effort my attention on something growing and becoming, and begin to feel the radiant soul warmth and soul coldness that comes off that thing. So it's just one example, but there are many such occult thresholds. Another one, for example, is the will in your thinking. If I were to ask you to say, divide 2,856 by 12, it wouldn't just, unless you're a very unusual person, just come to you. You'd have to set at work the will in your thinking to try and do that kind of mathematical exercise, especially if you tried to do it without paper and pen. You can feel the will in your thinking when you're up against something like that. Now, if you take a common phrase, something like wisdom lives in flowing light, and you think only that thought, and to the exclusion of everything else. I mean, at first you repeat it to yourself over and over and over again. I don't know if you've ever taken a word and repeated it until it loses its meaning, but there's a very interesting process where the meaning and the word start to drift apart. And in this meditation, you have to strive to hold the meaning and the word together. And again, this is something that, if you try it once, you're not likely to have much of an experience. It's something you'd have to do hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe for 15 minutes a day for several years. But if you do, you will start to feel the will in your thinking as part of a kind of a second self, a kind of a higher self that you start to become aware of. And at a certain point, the sense of your I am is more attracted to that higher self than the everyday self. And you start to move towards the experience of the initiate who doesn't, when we say I walk through the door, we really mean our body walks through the door. But as you develop this will in your thinking, you get to the point where you realize it is the will in your thinking that carries your body. You start to have a pivot in terms of your point of self-identification from this external physical form to the internal. Just to give you a couple more examples of these thresholds. The sound of an animal or a person. So at first you just hear the sound. Now maybe if it's a very dramatic situation, say an animal was, I don't know, shot by a gun and was crying out in pain. In that case, the pain of the animal usually makes its way felt into the soul of a person unless you're completely an insensitive type. But what about if you listen to, say, a bird chirping? I don't know if they have these birds in Europe, but we have a bird, obviously, in North America called a robin. If you really listen to a robin chirping, depending on what's going on for the robin, you can get to the point where you listen through the sound into the soul nature of the robin. And you actually will have an experience of the mind of a robin. It took me, again, hundreds of times to do this, to get to the point where I could hear a robin say, I had a good day. I had a good day. I had a really good day. I had a good day. I had a good day. I had a really good day. You actually get to have an experience of the inner life of the robin. And it's quite different than you expect it to be. It's repetitive and demonstrative, not the way human beings are, or the way we talk. Very different kind of consciousness there. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about the fact that all of these things are part of our design. And as we start to develop these things and develop the chakras, there's a whole bunch of exercises. Obviously, we can't go through them all now. But as we develop these chakras and as we move towards becoming conscious of ourselves, not in the physical level, but in the etheric level, the new part of the chakra that has never been developed, that is seed-like, starts to come online, as it were. First, you'll feel it a little bit like a kind of like a spine on the front of your body. It's hard to describe otherwise. And you'll feel different people feel this differently, but you'll feel the concentrations and the shape. And then, of course, when the chakras start to move, you start to have your first clairvoyant experiences. All of this is part of what we are designed for. And if we're striving to be a good human being, it will happen naturally. If we want to fast track it, we can undertake the meditative path. Why would we fast track it? There's really only one reason, and that's to help other human beings. The sooner that we can develop, the more potent and capable we become of helping other beings, helping other people especially. And so any effort to fast track your development for your own purposes will lead to a kind of, it's hard to describe it exactly, but a kind of misalignment of you and the spiritual world. And that can be quite serious. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But when the other surprising thing that happens is the chakras, the old part of the chakra, what was given to us before, comes back online as the new part of the chakra you're developing comes into being. And there's a kind of a mystical relationship between the aspects of the chakra that comes online, what you develop through your own free effort. And it takes tremendous effort. I mean, for most people, unless something unusual is the case, it's thousands and thousands of efforts. So what comes online brings back the polarity of what was in the existence in the atavistic chakra. So for example, if you're looking at the chakra in the region of the heart, this really is the chakra of harmony. You know, sometimes Rudolf Steiner talks about the leaders of humanity are the masters of wisdom and harmony. He's talking about the chakra in the region of the throat, which has to do with the saturation of your life with wisdom, and the chakra in the region of the heart, which has to do with the creation of harmony between you and the spiritual world. So in the chakra related to the heart chakra, the chakra of harmony, the first thing that you have to develop is a very logical, consistent, linear thinking. And there's exercises for this, obviously. But when you develop this logical, consistent, linear thinking, what appears as the atavistic polarity is the capacity to have the right idea at the right time out of nowhere. And so you can see how these things are kind of fused together. You get to the point where you really, not just in a moment when you're trying, but throughout your day, you live with logically ordered thinking. And you will notice that you develop the capacity to have the right idea at the right time out of nowhere. So these skills and talents will come to anybody who's trying to be a good human being in the full significance of that simple phrase. But they can be fast-tracked through these meditative exercises. Okay, so that's enough of an opening talk. I'd like to get into doing a meditation with you all. One of the most significant occult thresholds has to do with the capacity to admire or revere or respect, especially things that have to do with truth and knowledge. And you, as a student of the path, need to cultivate your capacity for reverence for truth. That's the simplest way to think about it. But it really can be respect for capacity or admiration for skill. But at the core of all of these things is a reverence for truth. Now, if you're going to cultivate feelings like reverence or admiration or homage or devotion, you have to be able to remember what those feel like. So you have to be able to have had or be able to think of an experience in your life where you can remember feeling reverence or admiration or respect, And so what I'd like you to do for this first meditation is think of a moment in your life where you can definitively remember having one of these feelings: reverence, respect, admiration. Some of you will have to think about a moment where you experience something like wonder in nature in order to get close to this. It's surprising uh, how often people can't remember feeling truly a deep sense of respect or admiration for something. But see if you can find in your memory an experience like that, and make sure it's one you're prepared to share. And then what we'll do is we'll take a couple of minutes in meditation, each of us, to remember the experience of admiring or respecting. And then after you've really remembered it, try to feel what it was like. What was the context? What was going on? What was the feeling in you? And try and remember that feeling as well as you can. And then we're going to break out into groups of two. Grant will do his technical wizardry and put us in groups of two, and then you can share your experience back and forth. So just to break this down a little bit more, we'll do the meditation for maybe 3 to 5 minutes, just remembering the experience, and then we'll have about 10 minutes or so in the breakout groups, 5 minutes to share either way. Does anybody have any questions about the instructions? This is a very specific exercise where, again, you find an occult threshold in everyday experience. To listen to a past experience, what you need to do is, first of all, think of some past experience that you can remember reasonably well. It actually doesn't have to be anything of great significance. You could imagine the last time you had to shovel the snow, or the last time that you folded the laundry, or the last time you took your dog for a walk, or anything along these lines. You could also imagine, a time that you were in a job interview, or how it was to stand at the altar of your wedding. You could pick any of these things. The point is to relive the experience in your memory in first person as best you can. And this is diametrically different than trying to see yourself as a stranger, which is an entirely different exercise. In this exercise, listening to past enjoyments, you're trying to remember the experience as it happened as best you can. And why would you do this? Why would you go back to some aspect of your life and remember it as exactly as you can? Because when you do that, you allow the experience to talk to you again. The first time through, you probably missed a lot of its richness. Generally speaking, we go through our lives missing a lot of what is, you could say, on the boundaries of our awareness. We're aware of something, obviously. I'm aware of the fact that I'm looking at a lot of little postage stamps of people's faces right now, and it's always trying to get a sense of how people are listening to me and all this kind of thing when I do this kind of thing. But there's always things that are on the boundaries of our consciousness that we may not be aware of. And it's when you relive an experience, sometimes you get something from the boundary. You get maybe something that you know that you weren't aware that you knew, or you actually are able to experience a sensation or a quality of something that you weren't aware of at the time.
No, the time because of that.
So I'm going to just give you one quick example. I was I was remembering eating a bowl of strawberries. A nice, pleasant memory, a nice one to live through again. And as I was doing this, I had the clear awareness that strawberries are an unusual fruit because the seeds are on the outside of the fruit, not on the inside, as they are with most fruits. And that insight came through me in the process of remembering the experience. Another experience, going for a long hike with my wife down in Nova Scotia, coming out of a clearing and seeing this body of water over to the right. later on, when I remembered the experience, I could feel a presence of the elementals in the body of water that I wasn't really conscious of when the experience happened. So what I'd like you to do is pick up some memory that you can remember reasonably well and just try to go back through it as carefully as you can. What were you thinking, what you were feeling, but try to do it as much as possible as if you were re-experiencing it. So not like you're seeing it as a stranger or you're something outside of yourself, as you actually went through it. And just try to allow the experience to reveal its inner message to you. And then we're going to break into groups and talk about this, but this time we're going to break into slightly larger groups of about 5 people. And you can share what happens. The reason why we're breaking out into slightly larger groups is for a lot of people, nothing happens when they have this experience. It's just a completely, first time through. And so having 5 of you in the room, you'll have more likely have a chance to have people who have different aspects or experiences. So once again, pick a memory that you're okay to talk about. Live it through as clearly as you can, once, twice, 3 times. We'll do that before we go into the breakout groups. And then in the breakout groups, share what that was like with the other people in the room. Does anybody have any questions about the instructions?
I do, Charlene.
Yeah.
Should it be just it could be any experience, or should it be one that doesn't have a lot of charge to it?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you.
As long as you're comfortable sharing it with people.
I have a question. How can it be fairly recent incident?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
For listening to past enjoyments, it can be something that happened yesterday or 5 years ago, or as long as you can actually remember it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, Grant, so let's give people, 4 or 5 minutes to do the exercise. And then we'll have maybe 10 minutes or so in the breakout groups. And in the breakout groups, just try to listen to each other in a respectful way, and where the memory can reveal something to you that you don't know. And that's the work involved. So very often when you recover a memory like this, first you just enjoy it. So take that same memory and do the exercise maybe 10 or 15 times. Go back through it again and again and again, not just at the same day, but over successive days. And each day, try to get to the point where the memory can tell you something that you don't yet know. So you go back through it again and again and again and try to get the details as accurate as you can and listen to it as if you were listening to a teacher. That you're trying to hear the inner meaning of the memory. Then you move out of an egotistical re-enjoying of something from your past, and you start, in a sense, working in a kind of respectful way for the depth of what's in the memory that you don't yet know. And this will yield things even if you're remembering something as simple as what it was like the last time you shoveled the snow. If you can find a kind of expectant learner posture as you go through your memories will start to unfold and teach you things. And then you'll move past simply enjoying the memory to actually learning from the inner being of the memory. Okay, so let's leave that there. We've got a couple of minutes left. I think maybe just open it to questions if anybody has a question.